This video is made possible by War Thunder.
Albert Heijn, the largest grocery store chain in the Netherlands, becoming public in 1948 and opening its first supermarket 7 years later, it quickly solidified itself as a Dutch household name. The business had humble beginnings when, on the 27th of May 1887, Albert Heijn himself purchased a grocery store from his father in Oostzaan, Netherlands. In the years following, he expanded to locations in several cities across the Netherlands. Skip forward. By the 1970s, control of the Heijn family business was being overseen by Albert Heijn's two grandsons, Albert Heijn Jr. and his brother, Gerrit Heijn.
In the early hours of September 9th, 1987, a 56-year-old Gerrit Heijn is in his luxury villa in Bloemendaal, Netherlands, as he prepares to leave for a scheduled dentist appointment later that morning. Gerrit is an extremely wealthy businessman. Along with his brother Albert, they are co-executors of the Ahold Corporation, Albert Heijn's parent company. In a nearby car park sits a stolen Fiat Uno. Inside, a man wearing a makeshift disguise made up of a fake moustache and a beret. Tucked under his coat is a sawn-off firearm. He had stolen the Fiat from his brother-in-law, and equipped with false license plates, he'd driven 35 minutes from his home in Landsmeer to the affluent area of Bloemendaal. He slowly steps out with a Fiat, and with his firearm still neatly tucked under his coat, he paces towards the villa. Meanwhile, as Gerrit Heijn prepares to leave, he unlocks and opens his garage door, enters his Audi, and drives out. He'd leave the Audi shortly after to close the garage door, and as he returned to the driver's seat, a rifle is pointed towards him. The gunman demands he starts the car and drives. Shaken, Gerrit obeys, and the German automobile starts to move, albeit not particularly far, because after just 1,600 metres, as they pass the stolen Fiat parked in the initial nearby car park, the two transfer into it. The gunman carefully, yet firmly chains Gerrit to the driver's seat. So with now both the captor and Gerrit in the far smaller, cramped vehicle, with Gerrit still subtly at gunpoint in the driver's seat, the two travel quite the distance. Nearly 2 hours away to the central Dutch province of Gelderland, specifically the Veluwe region, and the car is parked near the neighbourhood of Schaarsbergen. Gerrit is forced out of the Fiat, and the two walk through the secluded, quiet, wooded areas, surrounded by, ironically, serene nature. As they stroll along, the two discuss their interests in different music, as well as Gerrit's family. They move through the woods for around an hour before returning to the car. Once back in the Fiat, the man reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a small tape recorder. He orders Gerrit to make ransom demands, and of course, Gerrit has no option but to comply. At a certain point, the two leave the Fiat once more, wandering off for a bathroom break. They had moved far enough that they had reached an area that had become slightly more built up. Roads now followed along the Dutch greenery. Gerrit became more and more on edge. He had no idea who he was with, and more importantly, where they were ultimately going. All of a sudden, Gerrit's eyes widen as he sees a blindingly bright light, a light that was moving towards the two of them. Gerrit soon realises it's a large transport truck, and with a small window to make a decision and act, he bolts towards the road and frantically tries to flag the truck down. But, for whatever reason, maybe because it was dark and there wasn't many people around, the truck seemingly doesn't acknowledge Gerrit and continues on, leaving him helpless. The man grabs Gerrit and forces him back into the car, and after a few demands, the two are on the move once more. The car screeches to a halt. They've made it to the municipality of Renkum, the Juno estate near Doorwerth. They reach an opening of trees that sits afoot a large forest. The man turns to Gerrit as the two stand at the mouth of the woods and bluntly explains that the two of them will enter the forest, and once in, they will meet with an arranged accomplice and Gerrit will be handed across. Much the same as the previous key moments throughout the night that led to this point, Gerrit didn't have much of a say on the outcome of this arrangement. So along with his unknown captor, they venture into the dark woods. After a while, with the plan seeming to go through, the captor makes his way out of the woods alone, walks back to the stolen Fiat and drives. And what would follow would go on to be one of the longest running, highest profile kidnappings in Dutch history. In a home in Landsmeer, 10 miles north of Amsterdam, a wife is wondering where her husband had gotten to after he hadn't returned the previous night. In fact, wondering was a bit of an understatement. She was so concerned she'd filed a missing persons report for her husband. But this lady wasn't the wife of Gerrit. As soon as the man returned home, to the relief of his wife, she retracts the missing persons report. He explains he'd simply been on a walk to Hoorn, and the two continue to live on as normal. But the same couldn't be said for the Heijn family. Nobody had heard a thing from Gerrit. His Audi had been discovered abandoned close to his villa in Bloemendaal, and when he hadn't arrived for his scheduled dentist appointment on the morning of the 9th, this only posed more questions. Not to mention, the Ahold Corporation was missing a very high-profile CEO. As more time passed, with still no sign of Gerrit, either in person or through forms of communication, a full-scale police investigation sprang into action. A large search operation was launched with ground forces made up of groups of officers and sniffer dogs, along with an air support team made up of helicopters equipped with searchlights, as the search for Gerrit continued on through the night. After hours of thorough searching, moving through the day of the 10th, eventually, with the scale of the search party being difficult to conceal and a very obvious empty chair at Ahold, the news of Gerrit's disappearance had been picked up by Dutch press.
Gerrit Heijn.
So with the situation now public, the police decided to use the publicity to their advantage, asking for anybody with any leads or information regarding the disappearance that may aid the investigation in any way to get in contact with Dutch authorities immediately. As the news breaks later that evening, in the days following, police received numerous letters from people writing in claiming that they were the ones who were responsible for the abduction of Gerrit Heijn, demanding ransom for his return. The police took all letters seriously and followed each one thoroughly, but after further investigation, many of the letters turned out to be fake, with no solid backing. But as the police wrestled with numerous fake leads, the Heijn family themselves would receive a singular letter sent 3 days after the kidnapping on September 12th. It stated that Gerrit had been abducted and that correspondence with the Heijn family should be made immediately. It also noted that in the interest of Gerrit's health, police shouldn't be informed of the letter, even if Mr. Rao, Ahold's head of security, and Gerrit's brother Albert say otherwise. This mysterious letter threw up several questions and obstacles for the Heijn family. Was the letter even real? It was sent to them directly, and the fact that it stressed it should be kept a secret. Well, after much deliberation, the Heijn family concluded that they couldn't approach the letter alone. So, against the rules laid out in said letter, they reached out to Dutch police for assistance. Not being in a position to afford to take risks with such a volatile situation, the police, once again, decided it was best to follow the lead. Now, there was of course no address listed on the letter, so the Heijn family had no way to respond to the senders directly. Well, it seemed that the captors had not only thought of this, but had come up with a unique solution. Within the letter, they mentioned forming a line of communication through subtly coded advertisements that should be placed within the local newspaper. Well, for whatever reason, maybe a mix of desperation and curiosity, or whether they were just following leads, the police, along with the Heijn family, agree that they're going to follow the demands. So on the 15th of September, as instructed, they place a coded advertisement within the newspaper, secretly addressed to the captors, confirming that they will comply with communication demands. So with the paper published, the police wait patiently for any sort of response or proof that the letter was real and not just yet another hoax. Well, they wouldn't have to wait long, because just 2 days after the advert was listed, on September 17th, a small package arrived at the police station. Inside were the keys to Gerrit's abandoned Audi and a tape recording. As police inserted the tape and pressed play, they would make a shocking discovery. The recording was the voice of Gerrit Heijn himself. To their surprise, not only did the police confirm that the letter was real, they had finally found a solid lead that led to Gerrit. All police knew so far was that Gerrit had supposedly been taken captive. They had proof that he was in the sender's possession, and they had to use encoded newspaper adverts to communicate with the captors. However, a team of professional behavioural analysts and detectives concluded that based on current evidence at hand, this was only a small piece in a much bigger picture, and that the abduction was being executed by a much larger criminal organisation than first thought, a network of sorts. But the fact that police had heard Gerrit's voice had given the detectives hope. It was now just a matter of tracing the origin of the letter back to its author, and ultimately the location of Gerrit. So with the letter's validity chillingly confirmed, the police could assume one thing. From the wording of the letters, Gerrit was seemingly alive, at least in writing. But ultimately, amongst the chaos, One of the police's main goals was to ensure that major information about the investigation was kept away from the public to guarantee the safety of Gerrit and to buy themselves more time. So to tackle this, the Justice Department quickly put in place an internal information blockade of sorts. In short, the primary aim was to have a system in place where key information or advancements about the ongoing investigation would only pass between the relevant authorities and Gerrit's close family, and was not to be freely released or leaked to the public unless absolutely necessary, and it would have to be approved of beforehand. So moving forward, with this being their only chance of reaching Gerrit, on the 19th, the Heijn family and police decided to place 2 more cryptic newspaper adverts confirming that they were ready to continue with whatever would proceed. This time, a response took slightly longer. Several days passed, but on September 30th, Dutch authorities received yet another letter. But this time, there was one very clear motive outlined. The captors demanded a ransom of cash, diamonds, and other various gems that totaled 7.7 million guilders. And it was with this new letter the police realised that they had something much bigger on their hands.
Hello, you've reached Joeseppi & Sons Ad Solutions. If it's an ad you need, we'll give you a read. Oh, hi, boss. An ad read? From us? Oh, yeah, of course. No, don't give it to Dave. We've got you covered, don't you worry. Last chance, or I'm fired. Yeah, no, of course. Good idea. It's funny you say that. I've actually got an ad right here in front of me. Okay, here it is. Just bear with me one sec, boss. Okay, let me present to you War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. And it's now available for free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. You can take control of over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations, ranging from biplanes and armoured cars of the 1920s to main fighter jets and battle tanks of today, where incredibly detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and authentic sound effects place you right at the helm of the most powerful war machines of our time. Join a worldwide community of over 95 million players in an epic PvP battle today. There's simply no game better suited for fans of military history. When I think of you, boss, 2 words come to mind. No, not those 2. Customization and creativity. I mean, just look around at this office. How beautifully decorated it is. Well, since you like creativity and customization, War Thunder features a comprehensive customization system with countless camouflages, historical markings, and decorations for all types of vehicles, including community-created ones. You don't even need any extra hardware. You can drive any tank or fly any aircraft with nothing but your keyboard and mouse or controller, even in simulator mode. Now, if you don't mind me, boss, I've just got to briefly break the 4th wall. You can play War Thunder for free right now on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile devices by clicking my link in the description or in the pinned comment below. But wait, there's more. It says here in the paperwork that new and returning players on PC and consoles that haven't played in the last 6 months will receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of a premium account. But it's only available for a limited time, so you've got to be quick. So, what do you think? You love it? Amazing! You're firing me anyway. Replaced by an AI system. No, yeah. Makes perfect sense. I've just got something else I want to pitch you.
The reason for the abduction had been made crystal clear. A laid out hostage situation with set ransom conditions. The letter stated that the Heijn's response must be placed in the newspaper by the 2nd of October, just 2 days after the letter was received. Well, after much discussion, the task force came to the conclusion that even though the well-being of Gerrit was of utmost importance, they simply couldn't physically meet the ransom demands within the time frame. Believe it or not, it wasn't exactly easy to obtain millions of guilders worth of cash, diamonds and other gemstones at such short notice, and so the letter went unanswered. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a hold corporation was attempting to gather as much of the ransom as possible. In the coming days, the October 2nd response deadline came and went as police hesitantly waited for any further advancements, hoping that the decision to not respond to the ransom immediately wouldn't make the situation much worse than it already was. Well, 4 days after the planned response deadline, on October 6th, yet another letter landed on the police department's desk, and the tone of the letter was far from hopeful. It explained that because the Heijn family hadn't responded to the letters, Gerrit Heijn would be met with punishment. But this wasn't all. Attached along with the letter were Gerrit's glasses that he wore regularly, with the letter stating that he is no longer allowed to read. And if this wasn't already bad enough, an additional fine of 100,000 guilders was added to the existing ransom. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, panic instantly set in. Not only were the police trying to gauge who and where these letters were coming from, but with not much additional evidence to go off besides anonymous letters, this was no simple feat. But at the same time, authorities were also trying to balance ensuring the safety of Gerrit however they could. But with mounting pressure from the media for updates and the sudden disappearance of a major corporate figure, police decided to make a brief press release that stated a ransom had been received, though they purposefully withheld key information, the amount of the ransom, the method of communication, and the deadlines mentioned, as to not cause any more unnecessary media stir or public panic. So as the Dutch press and the rest of the Netherlands followed the story as closely as possible with the limited information publicly available, the police and the Heijn family were growing increasingly more stressed. Even the solo path of communication they had wasn't exactly efficient. Authorities would have to wait for a letter from the captors, then to reply they'd have to request a newspaper advert with a message encrypted within it, then wait for the paper to be published, then wait again for a further reply via letter. This was all unnecessary added time the police couldn't afford to lose, especially without specific details of Gerrit's situation. Frustrated, but equally fearful, on the 9th of October, the family once again commissioned a newspaper advert. It demanded that the captors set up a more direct line of communication to come to some sort of agreement or arrangement on the ransom and speed up the process. So with this, the advert goes live. As for the captors, they were quickly growing tired that the ransom demands weren't being met, but they weren't naive. They knew the key the Heijn family needed before they'd give over the ransom was proof that Gerrit was alive. So the captors thought, why not give them what they wanted? And they knew their delivery had to be a little sharper. After a week had passed, on October 16th, a second package arrived. Detectives hastily opened it, hopeful for a negotiation and a new method to provide direct contact after their response. Well, inside, a small film canister. Somewhat confused, lifting the film canister, it was evident that something was concealed inside, a small object of sorts. Unscrewing the top and pouring the contents out onto a tray, out rolled a small, fleshy object. It was Gerrit's pinky finger. But that wasn't all. Along with the pinky, a note that read, Gerrit Heijn will have trouble playing the piano for a while. It's no surprise to say that this discovery had shaken the Heijn family to their core. Not only had the captors made their anger for the missed deadline bluntly and morbidly clear, but authorities were still left with no clear route of direct contact. Police now had physical, biological proof that the captors had Gerrit in their control, and if it wasn't already evident by the severed digit, he wasn't exactly being well looked after. All this unbeknownst to the public. This was an internal disaster for the authorities, and the pressure to obtain the ransom only grew. But before they could even process the new evidence and choose how to act, just 3 days later, on October 19th, the Heijn family receive a second cassette tape with more voice recordings of Gerrit, almost as if the captors were toying with the Heijn family. New evidence was mounting. Clearly, whoever was behind this was trying to push the Heijn family to make a move, and quickly, forcing their hand. But the Heijn family couldn't be sure. Their logic was that if the captors were willing to sever a pinky finger to simply prove a point, what else were they capable of, and how far would they go? Especially as they applied more pressure. They needed more signs of life, So with this, the Heijn family once again requests for an advert to be placed in the newspaper, a process they had grown used to by this point. Encoded within this advert, a question, a specific question to be asked to Gerrit directly, a question that the Heijn family knew only he would know the answer to. What is the name of the black porter from St. Martin? Assumingly an employee they knew from a holiday destination, this question would pose as a sort of verification method for the Heijn family. So with their message to Gerrit hidden within the newly published advert, eventually a package arrived. Expecting an answer from Gerrit, the family rushed to open it. Inside, they found a singular tape recording. Quickly inserting it and pressing play, the family and the authorities sat eagerly, waiting for Gerrit's answer. As the tape plays, they finally hear Gerrit's voice. And although the recording was indeed Gerrit, he was strangely just simply counting from 1 to 19. And to their disappointment, the question remained unanswered, and subsequently, further proof was not provided. There was also a note tucked away with the tape recording that stated that Gerrit's condition was in need of assistance. Getting desperate, the Heijn family demanded more from the captors about Gerrit, requesting a photo of him holding a recent newspaper to be sent to them immediately. After the arrival of this additional cassette tape, the line fell silent for days, weeks. Nothing was heard from the captors as the Heijn family was forced to sit, wondering what Gerrit was being subjected to, as they worked with authorities to race against the clock. Well, if the metaphorical sand timer was quickly running slim, just over 3 weeks of silence later, on November 11th, over 2 months after Gerrit's initial disappearance, the sand timer would be shattered when, after a long wait, a letter arrives once more. The Heijn family receives a set of instructions from an assigned ransom runner. In 2 days, on November 13th at 11 p.m, Mr. Rao, the head of security at a hold, the same Mr. Rao that was mentioned in the first letter, is to be at the Amsterdam Akora Hotel. Once there, the hotel will be called, and the caller will ask to speak to a Mr. Rosa, Rao's alias for the deal. Once on the phone, he'll receive further instructions, and this would work to confirm to the captors that the Heijn family had prepped Mr. Rao as a runner for the ransom. So with this being the most solid level of communication and plan so far since discussions started, despite no concrete response on the well-being of Gerrit, backed into a corner, the Heijn family confirms to the authorities that they will go through with the ransom. So in no time to waste, please prep Mr. Rao and swiftly brief him on the instructions. He arrives at the Akora Hotel, trying to blend in as much as possible, as to not raise any sort of suspicion. There was always the option that the authorities could have pre-contacted the hotel, but with the situation being so volatile, they couldn't risk anything leaking to the press. So he passes through the hotel doors and takes a seat in the lobby. As time passes, Mr. Rao waits longer and longer. Still, no call from the reception desk. And there's only so long you can sit an individual in a hotel lobby before staff wonder who you are and start to ask questions. Not to mention, Mr. Rao was of course not a resident of the hotel. It was way past midnight at this point, and still, there was no sign of a call. Well, as 2 a.m. rolled around, it was communicated that Mr. Rao had to be withdrawn back to a hold, and so, authorities decided to call him back to the station. Well, later that morning, not long after Mr. Rao had left for a hold, the phone behind the reception desk suddenly rings. A night shift worker answers the call
Goedenavond.
and calls out for a Mr. Rosa.
ROSA, moment alsjeblieft.
But of course, nobody matched that name. The worker explained there was nobody under that name in the lobby.
Nou, ik zie hem niet, meneer. Ja, ik zie hem niet.
And the ransom arrangement went unfulfilled. With communication to the captors falling flat, this call at the hotel was literally the only lead the authorities had, so they assigned a great level of importance to it. Eventually, the police managed to arrange a second call opportunity. Similarly to the first, on November 26th, Mr. Rao is to arrive at the Akora Hotel and wait for a call, but under the name of Jan this time. So again, on the night of the 26th, he arrives at the Akora and sits in the lobby. All of a sudden, the hotel phone rings. The worker looks out for a Jan, and Mr. Rao accepts the call.
A12 highway op kilometerpaal 117,5.
For the first time, authorities had heard a voice directly from the captors, and they had a ransom location. But they had to move fast. By this point, a hold corporation had managed to gather some of the ransom. But their logic was that if they could deliver some of the ransom, that's better than none at all, at least for now. So the police start to put the ransom drop-off operation in motion. They gather up all the ransom payment that they managed to obtain and head towards the A12, following closely behind Mr. Rao. Eventually, they reach the small tunnel located under the A road, as described on the phone. Now, whilst the delivery ransom was a necessary step in Gerrit's well-being and return, it was also an opportunity, a chance for a huge lead for detectives. They had to be able to use this ransom to gather as much information on the captors as possible. There were two very obvious expected steps that the captors would supposedly perform that police could use to their advantage. One, once the ransom had been dropped off, the captors would of course need to physically collect the ransom in person somehow. So for this, the police needed to set up some sort of surveillance, but not on the tunnel directly. Not only was the path surrounded by wilderness, making it hard to logistically place a solid and viable method of surveillance, but if there was anything obvious or fishy, it was clear that up to this point, the captors were relatively calculated. Sure, they missed the hotel call deadline, but for all authorities knew, this was purposeful to apply pressure. So one sniff that they were being watched, and things may not work in Gerrit's favour. So instead, police decided it would be best to closely yet subtly monitor the highways and surrounding roads using modern technology to locate and track the car that the captors were in. That way, they would have info on the vehicle as well for further intel in the case. And two, once the ransom had been collected, the contents would then presumably go on to be used or sold in some capacity. So regardless of what the letter said, the police seized the opportunity to track the ransom by marking and logging the bills, allowing them to track and note their journey once they've been spent or deposited after the collection. Standing under the overpass, Dutch police placed a partial ransom in the tunnel as instructed and swiftly left, having only their set-up methods to monitor the surroundings. A team was assigned to monitor all cars moving in and out of nearby roads, tracking plates and individuals in said vehicles to try and tie just one to the gang. Meanwhile, with the deadline met, the captors prepare somebody to go and collect the ransom, and they set off, slowly travelling towards the underpass. Although, unfortunately for police, they weren't in a car. They were on a push bike with no lights. Using narrow, dark back roads, they had navigated up to the tunnel, successfully received the ransom package, and went undetected. As the bike continued on, further down the footpath, near a railway crossing, the ransom collector hid the ransom in a box that had been treated in such a way as to not be detected by radar technology. Then the box was buried underground for collection at a later time. Back at the station, with the night-long surveillance coming to no success in finding leads via the transport routes, Dutch police decided it would be best to visit the tunnel once more to see if the ransom had even been picked up. Upon arrival, there they stand in front of the empty tunnel. But before they could even start to reason on how they'd missed the pickup, one officer notices a stone with a note attached. The note demanded the rest of the ransom and a location for its delivery, which was ironically an Albert Heijn grocery store. Once there, they should wait for further instructions. Not knowing how long the ransom had been gone for, officers wasted no time and raced to the Albert Heijn. But upon arrival, the store was closed, and they were too late. After the mess of the last 48 hours, the Heijn family was starting to lose hope. It had been nearly 3 months since Gerrit's abduction, and they feared he was no longer alive. Now, despite the detective surveillance operation falling flat, they urged the Heijn family to wait just a few more days at least, as now the ransom had been acquired by the captors, albeit partially, they may start the process of releasing Gerrit, or at least communicate more, and the Heijn family sit and wait for further information. Early the next morning, after all surveillance had been halted, the collected ransom still sits buried underground. At some point, a push bike rolls down the rugged path, reaching the burial site. They frantically dig up the box of diamonds and cash, and with the ransom retrieved, they cycle off. A flawless execution. 3 days after the initial ransom collection had taken place, still nothing had been heard from the captors. Well, the Heijn family had decided they'd had enough. The plan hadn't worked so far, and whether it was fear, stress, frustration, or a mix of the three, they decided it was time to take a whole different approach, a last-ditch effort. That night, Gerrit's wife, Gerrit Heijn, appears on prime-time Dutch television, speaking directly to the gang that had kidnapped her husband. This was a huge shock to the Dutch press and public. Over the coming days, as the press went wild, meanwhile, Gerrit Heijn had still heard nothing about her husband. She'd appear on TV once more on December 3rd with an additional plea. Days pass, still no letters, no tapes, nothing. That was until, after several days, the Heijn family received a letter. It simply demanded that they prepare another runner to deliver the rest of the ransom, and that another advert should be placed within the newspaper to continue the communication as soon as possible. Well, the Heijn family had had enough. They thought, rather than sit still and be at the mercy of the captors, they knew all they wanted was the remaining part of the ransom. And having already delivered on part of it, they thought surely they would hold out for the rest, calling the captors bluff. So they continued their change of plans and turned up the volume. Up until this point, police had been careful to not allow any information out to the public to ensure Gerrit Heijn's safety, but it seemed that Hank's TV appearance had worked as a catalyst of sorts, because on December 19th, detectives decided a full-scale investigation to identify any members of the criminal gang could begin. So on December 28th, police returned to the local newspaper and issued an advertisement. But this time, it wasn't an encoded message to the captors, it was to the public. Police offered a reward of 1 million guilders for anybody who could provide any information that would lead to the arrest of any members of the gang or, of course, the retrieval of Gerrit. So over the course of the coming weeks, as communication with the captors had fallen completely flat, with the demand of the rest of the ransom being ignored, the police were sifting through 12,000 responses. It took around 2 months to sort through every tip and confirm their validity, all whilst the Heijn family desperately waited for even a crumb of vital information. As tips from the public rolled in, meanwhile, internal professional analysts started to build their own profile of the gang based on the total evidence that police had so far. They believe the gang as a whole is likely to be comprised of individuals with a history of criminal activity involving burglary and theft, and that the group consists of no more than 5 people, with at least 1 woman. They also believe 1 or more of the members are Dutch, but don't rule out the possibility that foreign criminals were also involved in the kidnapping. Based on the recording of the phone call at the Akora Hotel, they concluded that the voice on the line was likely a male of either Indonesian descent or possibly from the eastern region of the Netherlands. The style of writing in the letters is analysed as official and quasi-formal, and believed to be written by a woman with at least a secondary school education who is attempting to use more formal and complex language to pass as somebody with a higher level of education. After all 12,000 tips had been reviewed, detectives still had no viable leads on the gang or Gerrit's whereabouts. It seemed that everything they were laying in place was failing. The new year had passed by this point, and it was February 1988, 5 months since Gerrit's abduction, and Dutch police were starting to run thin on methods of tracking the captors. Maybe it was time for them to accept defeat, at least until something new arose. But rather than looking externally for information, it would be an earlier choice that police had made that would seemingly work in their favour. Police may have failed to have monitored who had collected the ransom drop-off and when, but they did mark the bills. Now, up until this point, detectives hadn't actually heard anything regarding the location of the bills or how they'd been spent, but sometime in February, this would all change. Detectives had received a flagged alert from an Amro bank. They identified that a 250 guilder banknote that matched the ransom set markings had made its way to the bank branch. The police couldn't believe it. Just as they were thinking the case would run cold, out of nowhere, a slip-up from a seemingly calculated group. The police knew that if the notes had made it back to the bank, they would have had to have some past journey to get there. So the police wasted no time and requested intel on where the notes had come from, what businesses they'd passed through, or how they'd been spent. Well, they discovered that the bills had been used in the Landsmeer area, tracing them back to a liquor store. The police's logic was that if the bills from the ransom had been used in this specific liquor store, there was a likely chance that the person who spent them would return to that same liquor store again. So, police rigged the store completely, removing the second cash register entirely, and installed a surveillance camera in the ceiling above the remaining register, which was wired up to a monitor located in the back room of the store. Officers were assigned to sit in the back room of the store daily, watching the monitor. 2 detectives were also deployed to work undercover in the store, disguised as store clerks, and the regular, existing cashiers were briefed on what note numbers to look out for and told to check each and every note with utmost importance. So with everything prepped and the operation finalised for execution, the police were ready to catch the captors once and for all. From mid-February 1988 onwards, the operation ran as planned. Every customer and the bills they handed over were reviewed scrupulously day in and day out to locate more of the marked cash. Weeks pass, hundreds of people pass in and out of the small liquor store, and even more bills change hands. Yet, nothing has been identified by this point, but the team remains determined, checking each and every bill. It's March 1988 at this point, the 3rd week of the surveillance operation, and on March 10th, like any ordinary day, a customer walks through the door of the liquor store, an older gentleman dressed in a long trench coat with grey, receding hair. He picks up a bottle from the fridge and places it on the counter. Reaching into his coat and retrieving his wallet, he slips a paper bill out and hands it to the cashier. Now by this point, the cashiers had the golden bill numbers memorised down to the digit, and checking every bill that changed hands had almost become a habit. So as usual, the cashier looks down at the bill, and the first few digits matched that of the ransom. Now this wasn't too out of the ordinary, because a lot of bills shared a similar starting string, but then the next few digits also match. The cashier's eyes widen, and the final few digits confirmed it. This was it. This was the guy. So as to not make a scene, the cashier smiles, hands the man his change, and he leaves. Finally, Dutch authorities had successfully matched the ransom to an individual that they had surveillance footage of, as well as proof that he possessed bills from the tracked ransom set. The plan had worked. Now, it was a matter of identifying this individual. The surveillance team handed over the footage and descriptions of the man to detectives, and after a few days, they had a profile of the individual. The man was Ferdy Alsace, a graduate of aerospace engineering from Delft University of Technology. Ferdy was reportedly a difficult man, unable to work within a hierarchical structure, an academic individual, but has serious problems when it comes to power relations and answering to others. He and his wife, Dutch visual artist Els Hoepkes, have 3 children, and in the summer of 1987, Ferdy had made several failed career moves and had been unemployed for months by this point, causing him to fall into financial difficulties and heaps of debt. So with Ferdy Alsace identified and known to by police, they thought that with him being a pawn in a much larger game, the one that did all their dirty work, rather than arresting him instantly, if they secretly monitored him, he'd eventually lead them to more intel on the entire network, or Gerrit himself. So throughout March and early April of 1988, moving into a vacant house diagonally across from Ferdy's home, a surveillance team closely monitored Ferdy as he conducted his daily routine, noting anything suspicious. They quickly noted that after his initial stop at the liquor store, he was seen spending more of the ransom banknotes in various other shops throughout the week. Although, as the surveillance continued, to the police's surprise, Ferdy didn't show any signs of meeting with accomplices or communicating with a larger group. Now there was always the idea that Ferdy either knew he was being watched and wasn't acting as normal, was conducting communication behind closed doors, or he'd simply be called in when he was needed, and that the surveillance team had monitored him at a bad time. But regardless, after a few weeks of close surveillance, authorities were none the wiser on the larger criminal network behind Ferdy, or more importantly, the location of Gerrit. But after seeing more of the ransom bills being spent, knowing that Ferdy Alsace was in some way linked to the ransom cash, and still needing more information, on the 6th of April 1988, 7 months after the abduction, police travelled to Landsmeer and raided Ferdy Alsace's home. He was arrested on suspicion of participating in a criminal gang that had allegedly been responsible for the kidnap of Gerrit Heijn. So Ferdy's brought into custody for questioning. Finally, the police were sitting in person opposite a prime suspect in the case. Ferdy was heavily questioned throughout the night as police dug deeper to uncover whatever they could. A flurry of questions was fired in his direction. Where was he on the night of the abduction? How was he tied to or communicating with a wider network? To see if his story lined up with evidence that police had collected. Well, Ferdy was stubborn. flippantly answering or dancing around questions, but the information given didn't seem to match the police's suspicions. When asked where he was on the night of the kidnapping, he claimed he couldn't remember the day and that he may have gone on a long walk, but he was unsure. So as the interrogation progressed through the night, detectives pressed harder, applying more pressure in an attempt to get Ferdy to slip up or reveal key information. Well, what Ferdy didn't realise was during his arrest, officers had searched his home, and they would make a shocking discovery. They found a meticulous plan of the kidnapping, laying out the date, the route, and the weapon to be used for the abduction. This was suddenly more than a man just spending a bill from the ransom set. They now knew Ferdy Elsas played a key role in the abduction, a more senior member of the network than police first thought. It was now just a matter of identifying the other key players, and of course, Gerrit's location. So back at the station, with huge additional leverage, police quizzed Ferdy on the found evidence, basically telling him they knew he was involved, to see how this would change his demeanour. Well, not long after police reveal they found Ferdy's documents, suddenly he admits he knows Gerrit's location. A squad of police cars race out of the police station, driving through the dead of night as they speed towards the location Ferdy had given, and eventually they arrive at a forest. Moving through the dark woods, they reach a somewhat small clearing somewhere in the centre of the forest. They had made it to the described location. A team of officers frantically excavate the forest floor, and to their horror, they had finally found Gerrit Heijn. On the night of September 9th, 1987, Ferdy Elsas had driven from his home in Landsmeer to Bloemendaal, abducted Gerrit Heijn and headed into the woods. But as Ferdy told Gerrit that he would be handed over to an accomplice once they got into the forest, an accomplice was nowhere to be seen. In the woods, Ferdy had drew his rifle and shot Gerrit dead, on the spot, a few hours after the abduction. Throughout the entire investigation, all the letters, the back and forth, the ransom arrangements, the phone calls, there was no gang, no larger network, and sadly, no Gerrit. It was all a meticulous plan, run and executed by one man, Ferdy Elsas. Police located the weapon in a small creek behind Ferdy's home, and as far as the voice recordings go, they were simply recorded on the car journey to the forest. And as for the pinky finger, Ferdy had removed it shortly after the murder and preserved it in a thermos full of ice. He then drove back to Landsmeer and dumped his car in the river. After the ransom collection in the tunnel, he cycled to an assisted living facility where his parents lived and had spent a few days in a guest room in the basement before, of course, making the fatal error of spending bills in the liquor store. In the following days, as the news of Gerrit's murder was broadcast across the nation, people flocked to Gerrit's makeshift grave at the burial site in the woods to pay their respects. In the court case, Ferdy was reported as never expressing any form of remorse, and the judge considered him a cold man with no feelings. When asked how he could have executed the plan, he stated, "I was in a military operation," and that he saw Gerrit Heijn not as a person, but as a tool, explaining that the ransom was not only to rid him of his financial difficulties, but to also finance future murders of others who had wronged him in the past. He also explained that he'd enjoyed instilling fear in the Heijn family with the delivery of the severed pinky. In December 1988, Ferdy Elsas was sentenced to 20 years in prison and court-ordered treatment in a specialised hospital. In 2000, he was pictured walking around during his first probationary leave, seen shopping in none other than an Albert Heijn grocery store. Ferdy was then fully released in August 2001, 13 years after his sentencing. He was released after completing the required hospital treatment and received a reduced sentence for good behaviour. During his prison term, he received intensive treatment for his uncontrollable resentment and underlying behavioural patterns, with the treatment proving so successful that forensic psychiatrists were almost certain he would no longer pose a danger to society. After his release, he would go on to do a handful of interviews discussing the murder, explaining that he was borderline mentally insane at the time, and admitted that he had fabricated the idea that the ransom was to finance future murders. And eventually, Heijn actually went on to publicly state that she had forgiven Ferdy Elsas for the murder of her husband. Well, on the 3rd of August 2003, Ferdy would leave his home, set off on his bike, and would be involved in a fatal traffic collision in the village of Vorden, whilst he was coincidentally on the way to a dentist appointment. The shocking abduction and murder of Gerrit Heijn and the 8-month-long investigation that followed not only sits firmly in history as one of the most prolific in Dutch history, but casts a dark and saddening shadow across the history and story of the Albert Heijn Empire. If you've made it this far in the video and would like to support the channel and the content itself, liking the video is a great way to allow it to be seen by more people. And as for subscribers and regular viewers of the channel, expect a very big, very exciting announcement in the first half of December. Again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring the video and making it all possible. Don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile now by using my links in the pinned comment or video description. New and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, including multiple premium vehicles and much more. Only available for a limited time.